You know, back in 1917, a storm of events kicked off that wouldn't just shatter a nation, but would actually go on to redefine the entire 20th century. So today, we're going to unpack the Russian Revolution. We're talking about a movement that toppled a 300-year-old empire and unleashed a political experiment that would literally alter the course of world history. And the consequences? Wow, they were so monumental, they shaped global politics for decades. What we're really talking about here is the complete and total collapse of a dynasty, one that believed it ruled by divine right, and the birth of a radical new ideology on the world stage. So, in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how the absolutist Tsarist empire just fell apart, and how it was replaced by a communist government led by one of modern history's most influential and, yeah, controversial figures, Vladimir Lenin.
Okay, so to understand the explosion, you really got to understand the pressure cooker it was in. In the early 20th century, Russia was a society on the absolute brink, with three core issues just fueling the fire of revolution.
All right, so first up, Russia was getting absolutely decimated in World War I. Constant humiliating defeats and millions of casualties. This totally discredited the ruling Romanov dynasty. Second, the war effort crippled the economy, which led to severe food shortages and widespread famine in the cities. And third, the Tsar himself, Nicholas II, and his German-born wife, Alexandra, were seen as just incompetent and completely indifferent to their people's suffering. And this slide really gets to the heart of the problem. Russia's social structure was basically a relic of the Middle Ages. You had this tiny, fabulously wealthy nobility at the top, and then this massive, impoverished peasant population at the bottom, with pretty much no middle class to speak of. The Tsar's failures just amplified the people's fury at this deeply, deeply unjust system. So, with the country starving and the government in total disarray, all that simmering anger finally boiled over in early 1917. But this wasn't some carefully planned coup, not at all. It was a spontaneous, leaderless explosion of public fury. And here's a fascinating little detail you need to know. We call them the February and October revolutions, but that's only because Russia was still using an older calendar. For most of the world, these events actually took place in March and November. It's a key piece of trivia to keep that timeline straight in your head. What's just stunning is how fast it all collapsed. It started with a single strike in the capital, Petrograd. Within days, the demonstrations were massive. The soldiers who were sent to crush the revolt actually ended up joining it. Suddenly, the Tsar had no power, and just like that, he was forced to abdicate. The regime fell so quickly, it shocked everyone, and this incredible wave of liberation swept the nation. In the aftermath, a provisional government took over, and for a brief, hopeful moment, it really felt like a new democratic era was dawning. They introduced freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and they even allowed political exiles, including a certain Vladimir Lenin, to come back home. But that optimism evaporated fast. The new government made a fatal error. It kept Russia in the war. It failed to address the two things people desperately wanted: land for the peasants and an end to the horrific conflict. This created a massive power vacuum, and a radical group was ready and waiting to fill it. And this is where we see the rise of the Soviets. Now, these were powerful, popular councils of workers and soldiers. As the official government floundered, the Soviets became the real voice of the people. They grew more and more radical and started demanding real change, which the Bolsheviks summed up in their brutally effective slogan: peace, land, and bread. This slide draws a perfect contrast between the two revolutions of 1917. The February Revolution was a spontaneous, popular uprising that toppled the Tsar. But the October Revolution, that was a calculated, strategic coup, planned and executed by Lenin and Trotsky to seize power for their small but very disciplined Bolshevik party. After storming the Winter Palace and overthrowing the government, Lenin acted with stunning speed. He immediately did what the old government wouldn't. He declared an immediate end to the war. He decreed that land would be distributed to the peasants, and he created a new body to organize elections. He gave the people exactly what they'd been screaming for. But here is the critical turning point. The Bolsheviks actually lost those democratic elections. So what did Lenin do? He just dissolved the assembly. At gunpoint. The promise of democracy was over, just like that. One kind of authoritarianism had been replaced by another, and Russia was plunged right into a brutal civil war. With democracy thrown aside, the Bolsheviks turned to brutal repression to cling to power. This next phase is known as the Red Terror. a campaign of fear designed to eliminate any and all opposition.
To enforce their rule, the Bolsheviks created the Cheka, their secret police. Their job? To crush all dissent through mass arrests, summary executions, and just horrific torture. For the first time, concentration camps appeared on Russian soil. This was state-sponsored terror on a terrifying new scale. The civil war that followed was absolutely vicious. It pitted the Bolshevik Red Army against a fragmented coalition of opponents known as the White Army. In a dark and infamous turn, the former Tsar and his entire family were brutally massacred. In the end, Trotsky's highly disciplined Red Army was victorious, cementing the Bolsheviks' one-party state. But the devastation didn't end there. In the wake of years of war, a terrible famine swept across the countryside. This number you see on the screen, that represents the death toll from that famine. Over 5 million people perished in a nation that was already bleeding. Now for the final chapter of the revolution's immediate aftermath, the official formation of the USSR and the ruthless power struggle that followed Lenin's death. In 1922, the USSR was officially formed, and this slide really reveals the illusion of its political structure. You see, on paper, it was a democracy built on a pyramid of Soviets. But in reality, the Communist Party at the top made all the decisions, and the Soviets below were just forced to rubber stamp them. So, when Lenin died in 1924, a power struggle erupted. The obvious successor seemed to be Leon Trotsky, the intellectual firebrand who built the Red Army. But a quiet, underestimated party bureaucrat named Joseph Stalin, well, he managed to outmaneuver everyone. Against all expectations, he seized total control of the party and the country. Stalin's rule would become one of history's most brutal. He imposed a totalitarian and bloody regime responsible for the deaths of millions. And yet, at the same time, he industrialized the nation at a breathtaking pace, transforming the Soviet Union into a global superpower that would go on to rival the United States. And the state that Lenin founded and Stalin built, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, it would last all the way until this year, 1991. A powerful bookend to a tumultuous story that began with so much hope and fury way back in 1917. And this leaves us with a stark, haunting question. The Russian Revolution began with cries for peace, land, and bread. It was a genuine popular movement for liberation. So how did that dream of freedom curdle into famine, terror, and one of the most oppressive regimes in history? That's a question worth thinking